He wanted to be a painter, not a dictator, not a warlord, not the man responsible for the deaths of 70 to 85 million people, just a painter. There is a version of history where Adolf Hitler spends his life sketching Vienna's architecture, selling watercolors at local markets, and dying quietly, unknown to the world. So what happened? How does a quiet, artistically sensitive boy from a small Austrian village become the single most destructive human being in recorded history? Today, we are going to answer that question. Not to justify anything. Nothing justifies what he did. But because understanding how monsters are made is the only way to make sure we never make one again. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small town on the border of Austria and Germany. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary life, but inside that house, something was deeply wrong. His father, Adolf Hitler, was a customs official, strict, authoritarian, and by most historical accounts, cruel. He beat Adolf regularly. He was cold, dismissive, and emotionally absent. He had almost no interest in his son's dreams. Adolf wanted to be an artist. Alois wanted him to become a civil servant. His mother, Clara, was the opposite. She was warm, devoted, almost obsessively so. She protected young Adolf the best she could. She encouraged him. She was, by every account, the one person in his early life who truly loved him. When Alois died in 1903, Adolf was 13. Many historians note he felt almost nothing. The cold, punishing presence in his home was gone. But 4 years later, Clara was diagnosed with breast cancer. And on December 21st, 1907, she died. Adolf Hitler was 18 years old, alone in the world, and the one person who had ever truly loved him was gone. His childhood doctor later recalled that he had never seen a young man so shattered by grief. That grief would become a wound that never fully healed, and into that wound, the world would pour poison. Shortly before his mother's death, Hitler had traveled to Vienna with a dream: to be accepted into the prestigious Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. He failed twice. In 1907 and again in 1908, the Academy rejected him. The examiners said his figure drawings lacked skill. His work, they said, was better suited to architecture, but he hadn't finished secondary school, so that door was closed too. Within 2 years, Adolf Hitler was homeless. He slept in shelters, survived on bread and soup from charities, and spent his days selling small postcard sketches to tourists just to eat. The future Führer of the Third Reich was sleeping in a Viennese flophouse, surrounded by drifters and down-and-outs. And it was here, in that humiliated, desperate, cold state, that Adolf Hitler first encountered rabid political anti-Semitism. Vienna at the time was a hotbed of nationalist, anti-Semitic politics. Pamphlets were everywhere. Politicians like Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna, openly blamed Jews for Austria's economic problems. A man named Georg von Schönerer built a movement around German racial superiority and hatred of Jewish people. Hitler devoured it all. Here was a framework, simple, brutal, clear, that explained why he had failed, why his country was struggling. It wasn't his fault, it wasn't Germany's fault, it was them. A young man, broken by grief, humiliated by failure, and desperate for answers, had found the ideology that would define and destroy the 20th century. In 1913, Hitler moved to Munich, and when World War I broke out in August 1914, he volunteered immediately for the German army. For the first time in his life, he had a purpose. He served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, carrying messages between command posts under live fire. It was one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. He was wounded, decorated, receiving the Iron Cross First Class, a significant honor for someone of his rank. The war gave Hitler something Vienna had ripped away: belonging, brotherhood, and a cause larger than himself. And then, in October 1918, everything collapsed again. He was in a military hospital, temporarily blinded by a British mustard gas attack, when he received the news Germany had surrendered. Germany had surrendered. By every account from those who were there, Adolf Hitler wept. He described it as the greatest shame of his life. 4 years of sacrifice, millions dead. And for what? He could not accept it. So he refused to. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 didn't just end the war. It humiliated Germany. Germany was forced to accept full blame for the war. It lost territory. It was stripped of its military. And it was hit with reparations so enormous that the German economy buckled under the weight. Hyperinflation destroyed people's savings overnight. Middle-class families who had worked their entire lives watched their money become worthless. Unemployment exploded. And into that rage, that shame, that desperation, Adolf Hitler stepped forward. He had discovered something in those Munich beer halls. He could speak. When Hitler talked, people stopped and listened. His fury was their fury. His enemies were their enemies. He joined the tiny German Workers' Party in 1919, and within years transformed it into the Nazi Party, built entirely on the ideology he had absorbed in Vienna's gutters: racial hatred, national humiliation, and a burning need for someone to blame. If this is opening your eyes to how history really works, stay with us. It gets even more revealing. After a failed coup in 1923, known as the Beer Hall Putsch, Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison. In that prison cell, he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, pouring every grievance, every hatred, every twisted ideology onto the page. He was no longer improvising. He had a plan, a manifesto. Then came the Great Depression in 1929, and the German people, already broken, needed someone to blame and someone to follow. Adolf Hitler offered both. On January 30th, 1933, he was legally appointed Chancellor of Germany, and once he had power, he dismantled every obstacle to more of it. The words in Mein Kampf became laws, then became trains, then became camps. The painter from Braunau was gone. The monster was in charge. So, back to our original question. How does a boy become this? The honest answer is, it was never just one thing. It was a childhood defined by fear and loss, a father who taught him that cruelty equals strength, a mother whose death left him with a wound he never knew how to heal. It was failure, real, humiliating failure, at the only thing he cared about, arriving at the worst possible moment. It was exposure to hatred during his most desperate and vulnerable years, when he had nothing and needed someone to blame. It was the trauma of war and the unbearable grief of a defeat he refused to accept. And it was a society in absolute free fall, economically ruined, nationally humiliated, searching for simple answers to complex problems. Each of these alone might have produced a bitter, broken man. Together, they produced Adolf Hitler, and that is perhaps history's most terrifying lesson. Monsters are rarely born. They are made. They are made by trauma that goes untreated, by ideology that fills a void, by failure that hardens into rage, and by societies that are desperate enough to follow anyone who promises to restore their greatness. The warning history gives us isn't about one man in 1930s Germany. It's about the conditions that made him possible. Because those conditions, trauma, humiliation, scapegoating, desperation, those don't belong to the past. Understanding history isn't comfortable, but it is necessary. If this video made you see history differently, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow and reach people who love history as much as you do. Subscribe to Past Unlocked History if you haven't already. We unlock the real stories behind history's most powerful moments. And drop a comment below. Do you think Hitler was a product of his circumstances, or was there something fundamentally broken in him from the start? I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next one.